never too late for one of these type of videos. 2024, it's the most that I've read. I felt like maybe I read too many books and that's why I feel like it was kind of lacking in something. But when I actually looked back at the reading year and all the books that I read, I had a hard time narrowing it down. And I don't know that I can rank these. I think that my top 5 or top 3, I can definitely rank, maybe. I narrowed it down because it was just too many to talk about. I did read 103 books this past year in 2024, and it's the most that I've ever read. I've never read that many books before. My goal was to do at least 52. And this past year, I set a goal of 50 and I went to 103, which was amazing. A lot of them were on audio. The stage of life that I'm in, I'm just really busy. I work full time. There's enough bandwidth at the end of the day that I have to be here for my boys and do stuff around the house and cook, other things. So I have a really busy life and, I got to balance it out with walking, which I enjoy doing. And so a lot of the time I'm listening to a lot of books on audio. So thank goodness for Libby. I tend to listen to 99% of the books on Libby. So they are through my library and the several libraries that I do belong to. Let's get started with the books. So I have my journal or my planner here where I have written down my books. It was really hard to get them in an order where I feel like it's fair. Maybe my top 3. So these books that I'm talking about today are not necessarily published in 2024. Some of them were, but a lot of them weren't. I feel like I leaned more towards backlist. And that's typically what I tend to do. I don't tend to just read new releases. The new releases that I tend to read tend to be from the book of the month if I actually tackle it when I get it. Also, the other thing I want to say is that these are not necessarily the most well-written books. These are books that have stuck with me, so that made me feel something, that moved me in some type of way. And there are books that are not on this list that did that. But when I look back at everything that I read, these are the ones that I'm like, yes, I want to talk about that. And then looking back at 2024, it was not a year that I read the books that I tend to gravitate for. I read a lot of romance, which I have never been a huge romance reader. I feel like it's increased in the past years. And I think I would say that more lately because of just the stage of life I'm in, where sometimes you just need something that's going to take less headspace. And I feel like turning the corner into 2025, I'm leaning more towards classics and I'm leaning more towards literary fiction, which is what I love the most. But I love reading everything. I just love everything. An honorable mention that I do want to talk about that caught me by surprise this year. I was really not thinking I was going to love this book as much as I did. And that is All Roads Lead Here by Mariana Zapata. I listened to this towards the end of the summer, early fall, and it was hella long. Okay, I've never heard of this author. She is a romance author, originally self-published. All Roads Lead Here is a slow burn romance where the main character heads back to Colorado, her hometown, where she used to live with her mom, who has passed away. And she goes, I don't remember why, but basically it's a slow burn romance where she rents an Airbnb in this place, and it is rented by a teenager. She did not know a teenager was renting out this Airbnb, which ends up being a room above a garage in this home. And the father finds out, and he's like a grumpy, gruff guy, and he's pissed. He's like, you need to go. I did not approve this, but obviously she ends up staying, and it's so fun. Like, she's like a 20-something-year-old, which I had a little bit of a hard time in the beginning kind of relating to her because I'm obviously not in my 20s. I think that if the author is able to set it up in a way that any age can read these books, like, that's amazing. And Mariana Zapata was able to do that very well with this book because I loved the slow burn in this story. I'm not a fan of insta love typically, but unless it's done really, really well. But she did such a great job with the story. It was long. It was so long, but I didn't want to leave. Like, I almost wanted to continue hearing more. Does the character make stupid decisions? Absolutely. It's fine. I just went for the ride and I enjoyed it. It was so good. There are deeper themes in this story, which is what I tend to love about certain romances, is that it's not just the romance. There's usually like a heavier theme involved. Like there's grief, there's loss, just family things. And I just love the dynamic between all the family members that were introduced afterwards and the issues that each character had that was introduced. And I felt like she did that so well that it just kept me like wanting to know more about the whole story. It was fantastic. Like it should be in my top, but I'm just gonna do it as an honorable mention. And I already talked way too much about it. Okay, the next book is a romance that actually did catch me by surprise. So the next few ones that I'm gonna talk about are romances as well. And I'm going to start out with this one. Ready or Not by Cara Bastone was a book that I received, or I chose, from Book of the Month. And I tend to not choose them because I'm like, oh, if I want to read it, I'll just get it from the library. And I never end up doing that. The cover kind of drew me in. I don't have it physically because I sold it right away on my Pango after I read it. I really enjoyed it and I read it fairly fast. I'm a little upset that I did that because I actually, it's a story that actually stuck with me. I really enjoyed that one. It was a really quick read. Basically, the main character is, I believe she's in her early 30s. She is single. She ends up pregnant after a one-night stand. The other people in the story are her best friend, her best friend's brother, the father of the baby, and so those are the main people that we're dealing with here. She's at a point in her life where she is reevaluating a lot of things about her life and her choices and how she wants to live. And her best friend's brother becomes a significant person in her life, and he ends up being there for her in so many ways. And obviously there's a friends to lovers romance that develops, and I just loved his character and how he was there for her. The other thing that I really liked about the story was that they didn't end up making the father of the baby to be an asshole. Like, I think there's a tendency to think, oh, he's like doesn't want to be in the picture, and that was handled really well, where he was kind of wanting to be there for her. Her best friend is someone who is dealing with fertility issues, and so handling that where she's pregnant from a one night stand, and here is her best friend trying to get pregnant. And it was like her happiness for her best friend, but her grief with dealing with that. It was a wonderful story. Again, a romance with deeper themes and just deeper things going on. I really, really enjoyed it. It was really well written, and I look forward to reading anything else that Cara Bastone writes again. So I read The Lost and Found Bookshop by Susan Wiggs, and I listened to that on Libby. The main character inherits her mother's bookshop. Her mom has passed away, and so she has to go back and like figure out what to do, and she uncovers all the issues that was going on. And so she discovers not only a hidden treasure, but the new people around her and unexpected love. I loved the story. I still remember a lot of the story. I enjoyed it so much that I looked up her other books and listened to something else right after that. So number 10 would have to be Foe by Ian Reid. This was also another book that I listened to. I have a couple of Ian Reid books on my shelves, and I still haven't gotten to those, but this one stood out for some reason, and I just started listening to it. It was a short novel. It's about this couple who, it's set in maybe like a kind of like a dystopian time, but you don't really get description about it too much. But this couple is in their home. It is nighttime. They're kind of getting ready to go to bed, and all of a sudden, there is someone in a car that pulls up on their driveway. The main character, he sees the headlights kind of shining into the house. And so he's kind of looking outside, and he tells his wife that there's somebody outside. And then the guy knocks on the door. Why these people let this guy in? He convinces the couple to let him in because he had something really serious to talk to them about. And it starts from there. And this is a crazy ass story because you really just feel super unsettled throughout the whole thing. It is very quiet, but unsettling. And you really don't know what's going on when you're reading this book. I was very close to DNFing, probably about 40 to 50% in, because I was like, one, I'm feeling super anxious listening to this. I don't like it how it's making me feel. And I wasn't sure what was going on. And so I said, you know what, I'll take a break for a day. I went back, thank goodness, because wow, this book was super unsettling. Let me tell you what the themes were. It is a chilling, thought-provoking novel that explores themes of identity, memory, and the nature of reality. This book was super unsettling. The end, I had to listen to it twice because I was like, what? It's so good. These are the type of mystery, kind of suspense, eerie books that I tend to prefer over the popcorn thrillers because these stick with me a little bit. There is an adaptation. I believe I watched it on Netflix or Hulu. I can't remember where, but I watched it with my oldest, and he was like, what the hell's going on? And I said, hold on. I think that reading it and then watching the adaptation was so awesome because it just allowed for it to like make you go deeper into the story. It was so good. I highly recommend it. So good. Next book, funny enough, is a mystery, suspense, psychological thriller kind of. Not super fast moving at all. This is Disclaimer by Renee Knight. I don't remember how I found this. I may have heard it on sometimes I hear like books mentioned in a podcast that they strike my interest and then I'll add it to my Goodreads. I was really thrown aback by the story because there is also an adaptation which is on Apple TV that I watched based on this story, and it was great. First of all, let me just tell you what Disclaimer is about. So we have this main character. I don't remember any of these. Basically, this woman's life is thrown into chaos because she finds a novel on her bedside when she gets back home at night with her husband from an award that she won. And I can't remember if she's a writer or something like that. I can't remember. Well, she finds this novel and she's reading through it. Like she's not sure who put it there. She reads through it and it's her life and secrets that she has hidden that happened many, many years ago. And so it throws her into like chaos because somebody has written about her and has left this on her nightstand. Nobody's home. Her son lives elsewhere. She calls the son and asks him, did you put this here in my room? And he says, no, but I actually have a copy of that book. Oh my gosh, this story is crazy. And basically you dive into the secrets that she has been dealing with for many, many years, that she has not allowed anyone into. But that world is about to be broken down because this is about to exploit everything. And you go back in time, and she goes back in time, and we kind of find out what happened, who the person is that left it on her nightstand, and that backstory. And it just takes turns that you do not expect. For the adaptation, it was done very, very well. It's a series on Apple TV, like I said, and they did a really great job. I believe it's 8 to 10 episodes. And this is something that I would not, there's a lot of nudity and a lot of sexual content. So even like my older teenager, I would feel a little uncomfortable with watching with me. I'm not trying to watch it with my teenagers. But it's such a great series as well. They did such a great job. I would highly recommend reading the book first and then watching the series. It is fantastic. I haven't even looked back to see what other things she has written, but I definitely will be diving back in. And I don't know if it's Renee, like a woman or a man. It could be either, so it doesn't matter. I will be reading whatever they have written in the past or in the future. So number 8 would have to be Before We Were Strangers by another Renee Carlino. This book I read on my Kindle. I had it on my Kindle forever. I sleep with my Kindle next to me because if I wake up in the middle of the night and I can't go back to sleep, I will turn it on, read, and it'll help me just go back to sleep. So I call this my emotional support book of the year. So it took me a couple of months to read it because obviously I was only reading it in the middle of the night. But there were points I didn't want to go back to sleep because I enjoyed this story so much. It's another romance, and it is a second chance romance where two people reconnect years after a missed connection. And these two people meet in college, and they form a really strong bond, and life happens, they become disconnected, and all of a sudden they're reconnected in some way. And I don't want to go too much into it because I feel like the discovery of this whole story is wonderful, and you really dive deep into their past and their connections, the connection made, and then you go and jump into their future or their present day. And it's so good, you guys. Like, I loved it. Is it top notch writing? Was it like the best love story ever told? Absolutely not. But I feel like it made such an impact for me to want to stay awake in the middle of the night to read this. It was like, oh my gosh, it was just amazing. I loved it. I know that she has other books out that I definitely want to look at, and I don't know how great they are, but I just really enjoyed this story. I'm going to put this one at 7, and it is James by Percival Everett. I borrowed it from the library, and I actually read that physically. I flew through that book. It was so well written. The story was just it just pulls you in, and you just want to keep going and knowing what's happening. And you probably already know what it's about. It's a reimagining, or not a retelling, it's a reimagining of Huckleberry Finn. And the main character is James, or Jim as he was referred to in Huck Finn. I never read Huck Finn. I've never read it. I don't know that I want to. I don't care to. And I would say that going into the story, you don't really need to know much about it. Percival Everett just pulls you in to the story and takes you on a ride that you just want to know what's going on. And I can't even describe this book. It's so smart. It's smarter than what I can describe. Like, I can't put it into words. I just read it. It's such an important book because it touches upon what freedom actually is. It touches upon identity and the things we do in order to survive. And it questions whether we are totally free at the end of the day. There's so much more. There's so much more than I'm smart enough to even tell you about in this book. I have never read anything else from Percival Everett, and this will not be my last. This was such a wonderful read. It was very quick. It was not a heavy book. It was actually a really fast read, and it's not very hefty at all. Fantastic. I will definitely be rereading that at some point. Number 6 is by one of my all-time favorite authors, and it is Pet Sematary by Stephen King. I have not read all of his books at all. I have read a good chunk of them. I'm slowly building my Stephen King library, and I have a bunch that I still haven't read. But I just love him. I love his writing. I love that his books usually remain with me for a very long time. Pet Sematary was, you have a family that moves to a small town in Maine. I went into this knowing it was about grief, and it's about decisions that are made to hold on to loved ones, and how sometimes making that decision can lead to something that was totally unintended, and that sometimes you just need to let things go. What I have written down here, it is that it's a horror novel that explores consequences of tampering with the natural order of life and death. It was a slow burn for me. Like, I feel like I didn't fly through this. It took me a while, and it was okay because it was one of those books for me that I wanted to just kind of like sit with and think about. And I think I just also had a lot of things going on when I was reading this. It was early in the fall, so usually that's a really busy time. I will definitely be revisiting this book at some point. I tend to reread Stephen King's books just because I feel like I get something different from them after a few years of reading. And this will be definitely one that I will be revisiting at some point. Funny thing is that when I finished it, to me, I kind of rated it like a 3.5 to a 4 in my head. And the more that it sits with me, This is definitely like a 5-star book for me, just because it has stayed with me for so long, and the way that I made me feel. Oh my gosh, like it's definitely heavy. I wouldn't call this horror. I mean, there are some creepy parts, and there are some parts that you're just like, holy crap, what's happening? But it's not like scary go, bump in the night. At least not for me. I guess I'm just I don't know. Everybody's a little different, but I would say this is definitely a heavy book, as horror-y as it might sound. Number 5. So this book was a surprise for me because I actually bumped into this book, I believe, in the library. I sometimes like to go and browse, and if something stands out to me, usually books scream at me, to be honest. And usually if they do, I will pick them up, read the quick blurb, and I'll pick it up and take it home. And if it grabs me while I'm reading it, I will continue reading. And that's what happened with this book. This is The Summer Guest by Justin Cronin. I have never read Justin Cronin before. I do have The Passage by him. This was actually written before The Passage. I read this, I think, in the early fall. So it was way past summer. In my brain, I had to because I tend to read by season. And so books like this, I would be like, no, I'm reading that in the summer because it says summer. Once I started it, I was like, screw it. I don't care what season it is. This is fantastic. But the cover looks like fall. So it's kind of, and it doesn't yes, it does take, a major part of the story does take place in the summer, but let me tell you what it's about. It's about a dying man's final summer and the profound impact he has on lives around him. There is so much more than that. There is so much more in this book than I can even say. You just get to know these two different families, the dynamic between them, the decisions that are made, and the consequences to choices that are made within their lives. When I started reading it, I could feel that this book was something that I wanted to own, so I ordered my own copy from eBay. But let me give you a quick blurb. I just can't describe the depth of this book. I really, really enjoyed the story. It was just very well told. The characters are so well fleshed out. And this is not even like a super heavy book. It's like 300 and odd pages. On an evening in late summer, the great financier Harry Wainwright, nearing the end of his life, arrives at a rustic fishing camp in a remote area of Maine. He comes bearing two things: his wish for a day of fishing in a place that has brought him solace for 30 years, and an astonishing bequest that will forever change the lives of those around him. Just the story of these families that are involved here it's so rich and beautiful, and the storytelling is it just draws you in, like you care for these people. It is amazing. It doesn't have to be read only in the summer, but if you like stories that take place in Maine, this would be a good one. It's fantastic. I really, really enjoyed this one. Number 4, I don't have a copy of because I listened to it, but I will be ordering a copy for myself because I really, really enjoyed it. The Things We Didn't Know by Elba Iris Perez. And it is basically a coming-of-age story about a young girl's childhood navigating the complexities of family, culture, identity between Puerto Rico and Massachusetts. So you have this young girl whose family moves to a factory town in Massachusetts, which is called Waronko, Massachusetts. I grew up in Massachusetts. I had never heard of this place. I believe the story takes place in the 60s, I believe. I want to say it's like 50s, 60s. The story is about the coming of age story of these children. The main character is a young girl, and you follow her throughout her life. You follow them growing up and living in Massachusetts after living in Puerto Rico, and then they go back to Puerto Rico and live there for a few years because of the decision of their mother, and wanting to get away from the father and her husband, and just because she felt so isolated there and just feeling like she couldn't live there anymore. Then you follow them going back and growing up and all of the things that they encounter throughout their lives. It has a lot to do with their identities, their cultural background, their identities in Massachusetts, having come from Puerto Rico and then going back and having lived in Massachusetts. it was such a good story because you got to see how the kids were affected, how this main character was affected, and how it affected her brother. And you just follow them all from such a young age to when they're older. And I loved the story. It was so good. I will definitely be picking this up in print so that I can read it again at some point a few years down the road. But it was so good. I really, really enjoyed it. And it's a story that has stuck with me. I didn't think that it would stick with me for so long. And I don't even think I rated it 5 stars initially. I think it was like a 4.5. And I was like, oh, that was really good. And I was like, oh, I'll probably forget about that. No, that story has stuck with me. All the parts of that story have stuck with me. And I really, really enjoyed it. That was number 4. We're down to the top 3. And my number 1, I know which one it is. It's just the next 2 I'm having a hard time deciding. I'm going to go with number 3 with this one. This is The Wedding People by Allison S. Patch. This has been on a lot of people's favorites. I understand why now, because this was an amazing book. I felt like the story just pulled me in and I couldn't let it go. I wanted to stay with this main character, go through everything that she was going through. And this is not a rom-com. This tells you different. This is not a rom-com. This is a pretty heavy topic. Like, Allison S. Patch, I don't know if it's S-Pack or S-Patch, but she did such a good job weaving humor in a book that has such deep and serious themes. Basically, our main character finds out, I believe she's in her 30s, she finds out that her husband has been cheating on her. And they make the decision, well, she makes the decision to leave him, and she is going through a huge depression, and she decides to rent a room in this hotel that she calls her happy place because it's basically a hotel that she has said to her ex-husband in the past, like, we should rent a room there, and just like, it's super expensive. Anyways, she goes there with the plan to end her life. Well, at that hotel, there is a wedding going on. The whole week, the whole hotel has been rented out for the week by this well-to-do family, this woman, and she finds out that the main character, I can't remember her name now, I think it's Phoebe, she finds out that she is there to end her life, and she basically, the bride says, hell no, because this is my week, this is my wedding week, and you're not gonna ruin it. The main character develops connections with people in the wedding party with the bride. We get to know about the bride. We get to dive into her character and the people around her, as well as obviously the main character and her story. And you just go through that whole journey, and then go to the end where obviously it's not how we come out of this. How do we come out of this, and why having gone through this and making these connections was so important for her. It's such a good story, you guys. I really, really enjoyed it. I didn't think I was going to pick it up super quick because I typically tend to let my book of the month club picks sit, and I should not do that because this book was fantastic. I loved it. I had a hard time saying whether this was 3 or 2, and the next one, I think it's maybe a recency bias because it was my last book of the year. But I will talk about that next. But I highly, highly recommend this. I tabbed a lot of things. I will probably be rereading this. This was a very fast, quick, wonderful read. I absolutely loved it. The next book is actually the last book that I read in the year. And one of the things that I have found in the past 4 years is that this has been a trend. The last book that I've read for the past 4 years have all been favorites. Like right at the end, have all been top favorites. And I think I'm gonna have to do a video on that because I still think about all of these books and they are amazing. This next one is called Sandwich by Catherine Newman. Super thin. I tend to go for chunky books. So when I saw this, I'm like, is it really gonna pack a punch? Yes. This is basically about a woman and her family. She is in her late 40s, early 50s, which, obviously resonates with me. She's going through a lot of things in her life. They vacation in this spot in Cape Cod every year. Same house, same food, same everything. Her kids are grown up, they're in college. Her parents are getting older and they have some, they're getting sick or they're getting up to an age where she's concerned about their well-being. She's married to a wonderful man, but it's almost like sandwich, like there's a sandwich comes up a lot in this story because it's not just Sandwich Cape Cod, because there is a Sandwich Cape Cod, although they don't say that that's where they're staying, but they're in Cape Cod. But there's a lot of mentions of sandwiches because she enjoys making sandwiches for the family before they go to the beach. She's part of the sandwich generation, which is basically when you have older children, but you have older parents and you're kind of in this middle stage. She's living life right at this point in her life. She's going through menopause, and then so the things that she's dealing with that and her body, and so all these things. And it's such a plotless book because there's no plot. There's like nothing happening. It's just what's happening in her and everything that she's dealing with. And it was so good. It's hard to describe. There were things and decisions that were made at some point in her life that she's not proud of, but that she kind of has to deal with at some point in the story. And we hear about that. It was good. I feel like there were a lot of books this year that came out that focused on the older woman, the woman going through menopause or perimenopause or what have you. And I appreciate that shit because, hello, it's so important to see yourself in novels. And when a novel resonates, and you don't have to resonate with all of it, but it's just like the parts of you that you get to see in a novel, those are the ones that tend to stick with you. I really enjoyed this. This was fantastic. I highly recommend it. Very readable. I can't wait to dive into her other book, which I do have on my shelves because I've heard wonderful things about that one as well. Last but not least is my number one. And when I was reading it, from the first few pages, I knew that this book was going to probably be my number one. That is The Covenant of Water by Abraham Verghese. The writing in the story is unparalleled for what I read all year. Fantastic, absolutely beautiful. And when I say that, I don't mean it was like lyrical and poetic and like unreachable. No, this book the writing is just amazing. It is something that you can read and not feel like you can't understand what the author is saying, which I have read books like that and they take a little longer to read. No, the reason this took me a while is because it's hefty. And I was very afraid to start this, but I have found that Miss Oprah picks books that tend to stick with me forever. Most of the books that I've read from her book list have become all-time favorites, bar none. I will make a video on those books because they are still with me even after 20 plus years that I've read them. This will definitely be in that category. We follow a family over generations. It's an epic tale, obviously, as you can see. And it is based in India, Kerala, India. Let me look at my notes. This is what I have written here. It is a sweeping epic that follows the intertwined lives of a large Indian family across generations haunted by a tragic curse. The tragic curse thing is just kind of like a sub thing. It's part of the story, but it is not the main story. You follow these people from a very young age. Basically, it opens with a young woman, a young girl being taken to a village to marry a man. Her mom is taking her mother's taking her. She's 11 years old, and her husband is 40-something years old. So this opens up in the 1900. So we span from 1900 to 1977. So 77 years we have here. But it starts out with that young girl in the 1900 being taken to go marry off a 40-year-old man. And I know that sounds disturbing. This is 1900, Kerala, India. That was not unheard of. However, the way the story is told, it's not like what you're thinking, like, oh my God, that's absurd, that's horrible. No, it's told so beautifully. This life of this young girl through her life and her family and the people around her and the lives that are intertwined. There are a couple stories in here that you see how they connect at the end or towards the middle even. It is such an amazing book. I don't have the words to describe everything that's involved in the story because there's so much and it's so deeply developed that I can't even tell you, other than if you've loved Oprah's book club picks, this is probably one of her tomes that are worth going through no matter how long it takes you. I know it took me a while because I was reading other things in between because she's hefty. And so when I have a big book like this, I tend to have something else to read along because if I want to take a break from this heftiness, then I want to read something else. And that's what I did. I read it over the summer. Beautiful, beautiful story. I will be rereading this again. And now that I have the story in me, I feel like I would be able to read through it a little bit faster. This will always be with me. Most beautiful story that I read all year. Number 1. I want to thank you for being here and listening to me speak about books in maybe not the most eloquent way. I'm trying to learn how to speak about books and talk about books without giving away spoilers, because that is the one thing that I want to avoid. I tend to go into books not wanting to know much because I feel like part of the surprise is just the discovery and just getting to know things on your own and discovering all the way that things unfold. That's super important to me, and I want to be able to provide that for you. But I feel like being here will help me do that and develop that skill, because it is a skill to learn how to speak about books and how people put things so eloquently on here. I'm not going to compare myself because there are people on here that speak about books in such a beautiful way that I am like, oh my gosh, I can't do that. But I'm here to gush about the books that I've read and share what I have loved or what I don't love or what doesn't work for me. And because some things might work for you, but I just want to be here to speak about the books that I loved, that I love and I recommend. And I hope that those 12 plus books, that in one of those you find a new gem. If you have read any of these and you have something you want to add about them, please let me know down below. Let me know what your favorite of the year was. Thank you again for being here, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.